Hello and welcome to episode 173 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tariq.
And thanks for joining us again on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And as ever, please do check out the back catalogue because we've had some great guests on there. Just recently we've had the likes of Dean Koontz and Lauren Bucas. So please do check that out. There's bound to be some authors or other types of writers that you're interested in. But this week we have a great guest because it's someone that has really been through the mill but then has landed on huge success.
Absolutely. We're chatting with the wonderful Mark Edwards, who, as Marco says, spent a long time, about 12 years or so, really trying to break in, getting nowhere. Ended up going down the Kindle route, self-pubbed it with a friend actually.
And was very successful.
A lot of success, yeah. And then, and then went into traditional publishing, kind of faltered, came back out, and now he's back into the Kindle store again with Thomas and Mercer. So I mean, he's been both ends of it. He's got a very unusual, convoluted route, and now he is like a 4 million success story. It's
4 million copies sold. I mean, over 4 million. So yeah, incredible story, and does really genuinely show, how tough it can be to be a writer, but also the importance of persistence and really believing in your own writing and sort of trusting your gut, I guess, at certain times in terms of what path to take, because it must have been very difficult getting that trad publisher and then deciding to go back to self-publishing again, and that's where he really got the huge success that he's led on.
And we've chatted to a few folk who've gone down the self-pubbed route, and and again, this is another person who's got a lot of insight into how you make that a success, whether it's the volume of books you put out, or whether it's your marketing, or what kind of avenues you need to make sure you're going down to connect with all your readers. Yeah,
so it's a really sort of wide-ranging chat. So we'll get straight into it after a quick advert for our Writer's Notebook, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
Did you always want to be a writer?
Yes, I think since I was a teenager, I used to read people like Stephen King and James Herbert and Clive Barker. And I used to fantasize about having a book with my name on the cover, probably some killer rats or slugs or something on there with along with my name. and English was the only thing that I was really ever good at school. I'm sure this is what everybody says, but writing stories was my I guess my talent. And so from about the age of 10, actually maybe even younger, I used to write comic books.
Mm.
So I was a massive comic book enthusiast, like all the things like 2000 AD and Eagle and all the funny ones as well, like Whizzer and Chips and the Beano, etc. So I spent most of my spare time drawing and making up stories for these comic books. And I used to rope in my friends to make them with me. But I was a bit of a control freak. I was the editor of these comics. And I would just end up kind of scrapping everything that everybody else did and just putting my comic strips in there. And yeah, and I used to one of my friends who used to do them with me apparently has still got quite a lot of them in his garage, but I don't have any. They're all lost, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, so that's how I started out doing comic books, and then I tried to write a novel when I was about 16. In fact, I did write a whole novel, but it was absolutely abysmal. And that's long lost as well, thank God, because it was so bad. It was a very terrible attempt to write a kind of Stephen King type
Right.
book. And then I started again when I left university. So when I was about 23, I wrote another novel which will never see the light of day, which was written longhand. And then I thought, this is so bad, it's not even worth typing it up. And then I started another one. So yeah, that's my very long answer to your to your question. Yes.
And was it your third? Was it that third one that you started that was your, I suppose, first serious attempt? Then would you say?
Yeah, I mean I wrote lots before I ever got a publishing deal. The third one was a kind of comic novel, a satire. Then I think the fourth one was probably the first one that was in the thriller, kind of psychological horror kind of genre, which is what I started to move towards when I figured out the kind of books that I wanted to write. And then the seventh, eighth, or possibly even ninth book that I wrote would have been The Magpies, which ended up being the first one that I published as a solo book. My story is a bit complicated because there's also the books that I wrote with Louise Voss as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean,
After, but I basically spent my entire 20s writing books which didn't get published. And I got an agent when I was 29, I think. And but then she couldn't sell my books either. So it was years after that, another 10 years before I actually got a book deal.
yeah, we were. I mean, we were going through your kind of your back list of books. I mean, you've written loads of books, and especially the last 10 years or so, you've been really a book a year almost, pretty much. And but up to that point, yeah, I mean, it looks like it was a really convoluted path and a difficult path. And you, I think the thing that struck me the most was you just kept going, on and pushing through it and just not stopping, which is great. And I'm right in saying that was it your third novel that got you an agent? Or it was early on you had an agent, and then you were how many attempts to get a book out?
Yeah, to be honest, it was so long ago that I can't remember all the numbers. It was probably more than that before I got an agent. And what would happen is, I mean, this was in the 90s, so you'd have to do it the old-fashioned way. Most of these agents didn't even have websites.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have to send everything in by post in a brown envelope with a stamped addressed envelope inside and send off 3 chapters and a synopsis. And my life was basically just kind of the rhythm of my life was hearing the thud of these rejection packages landing on my doorstep. But then every now and then every few months, I would get either a request for a full manuscript or I would get an agent saying, this, I really like your style, I like your voice, but it's not quite right for us at this time, but make sure you send us the next thing that you write. So I was constantly getting these little nibbles, which would keep me going.
Hmm.
I think if I had no interest at all in those first couple of years, then I would have given up quite quickly.
Mhm.
If some kind of mean Simon Cowell type figure had said to me, "You're wasting your time. Just go and concentrate on your day job," and then I would have given up. But I kept getting positive signs, and I'd get like short stories accepted, and um, but I never quite got got there. So an agent took me on in, it must have been 1998 or 1999, with a novel that I'd written. It was called The Liberators, and it was about a group of friends who make a pact to become famous. It was a kind of, it was a little bit secret history-ish, but set in London and set in the kind of media world. Um, and I think it was like 140,000 words long or something, which I'd never write anything that long now. It was mammoth. And she basically rang me up and said, "This book is definitely going to sell. We're going to make lots of money. You're going to be a big name, etc." And
Brilliant.
like really kind
God.
of got me very excited. And then it didn't happen. She started sending it out, and the rejection started coming in. Again, it was publishers saying it's not quite right. We didn't like the ending. We didn't like this bit of it. Or, all the excuses that they come up with. But make sure you send this his next book. And then that went on for a few years. And then I was on this TV show in 1999 or 2000, about aspiring writers. And they had they basically made a there was an arts show on BBC Two called Close Up, and they had three writers. There was me, who was the one with the agent but no publisher. There was Jake Arnott, who wrote The Long Firm, who just got his first book deal. And then there was a writer who was a friend of the producer, I think, who had written a book or part of a book but didn't have, and was looking for an agent. And they kind of tried to sex up the publication process and make it look all glamorous and exciting. And they filmed like bikes carrying manuscripts across London and things like that. There was nothing like the reality. And then they'd have me kind of walking moodily along the beach, getting a sad phone call from my agent saying another publisher has turned you down, and me looking
Were
all
you
sad.
were you having to act out the phone call, or did they actually film you live getting the phone call for the first time?
I think they actually did it.
It seems
I
brutal.
think they did it live, and they got me to read out loads of my rejection letters as well. Basically, the whole thing was that I should never
Wow.
have done it, really, because it attached that kind of whiff of rejection to me. And I think it actually probably set me back a few years, because after that agent dropped me, which happened kind of a year or two after that, other agents who I started to approach said I wouldn't mention the program in your letter because, although you came across really well on the program, it kind of, you've got that kind of
Yeah.
that kind
Stigma
of
of it,
taint,
yeah.
that taint about you. And it took me years after that. And it's quite funny. Every now and then I'll meet someone who was on the program. Like I met Johnny Geller and Sheila Crowley, and I met Jake Arnott at a party. And also the producer is now a published author. So, and with the same publisher as me, with Thomas and Mercer, which is really strange. So I keep meeting people from this show, and they're like, "Oh, we're so glad that you made it in the end." But yeah, it did take a long time.
And through that process, I mean, I suppose you've sort of touched on this already, but um, when you're when you're going through that process of a lot of work but not much in the way of reward,
Yeah.
what was it that kept you going at that point? Because it is, we all know that writing isn't an easy thing to do, and sometimes it can seem easier to say, well, you know what, I'm just gonna stop this now.
It was the fact that I felt like I was constantly like almost getting there and not quite, because my books they'd go to acquisition, or but get turned down at the last
Mhm.
meeting by somebody in marketing, or I would come up with another great idea, what I thought was a great idea for a book that I really wanted to write. And in fact, that was the thing that kept me going, really, was the fact that I loved the writing itself. I hated the whole process of trying to get an agent and trying to get a publisher. It just seemed to cause me nothing but pain. Or you'd get these kind of these days or weeks of hope, but then you'd have all the stress, the incredible stress of waiting.
Yeah.
So the times when I was just writing, it's a bit like that now, because you still go through, even now, I still have things rejected. I'm still waiting for things like, I don't know, film deals or whatever, or side projects, or there's always stuff going on now where you're waiting to hear something from your agent or your publisher. And that's easily the worst bit of being a writer. But
Every
it was
email that comes in, you're like, oh, is this it? Is this it?
Yeah.
Wait, checking every single
Yeah,
email.
every time you hear that ping, you think,
Yeah.
oh, maybe this is the email that I've been waiting for.
You see it and you think, I'm not going to open it. I'm gonna wait a minute. I'm gonna
I know, your
first,
heart
and then I'll
kinda
read
goes
it. Just yeah.
your heart and your stomach. I still get it now after all these years, that if I'm waiting for news about something. So yeah, I guess it was the actual joy of writing, and I still have that now when I'm immersed in a book. I'm immersed in the story that I want to write, and I still get ideas that will come to me that I just think I really desperately want to write, and I want to tell that. I want to tell that story, and I want to kind of spend time with those characters that I'm going to be inventing. Yeah, that's why I think I people say to me kind of, oh, when you retire, and I think, well, I'll only retire when I can't, basically my brain doesn't work anymore and my fingers don't work anymore. Even if people have completely lost interest by then, I imagine I'll always be doing this. I'll be found dead, slumped over my keyboard, hopefully in my 90s.
Yeah, I mean, the writing's
With
the
a
fun
half
part,
in-
isn't it? I suppose, although it can be
Yeah.
difficult, but it's
Yeah.
all the other stuff that goes with it that is
Yeah, it
is
can
the
be agony.
headache.
I mean, but then there are other parts of being a writer that are fantastic. So, I've just got back from Thriller Fest in New York. The perks of being able to go and do things like that, to be able to go to New York and talk to other writers as a peer, or go to the Harrogate Crime Festival, or even being invited onto things like this, like talking on podcasts. I really
I mean,
enjoy,
this is obviously the
and
peak. You've
I
peaked
enjoy that,
now.
and I enjoy kind of chatting with my readers on social media, and doing live streams, and doing events and signing books. And I love all of that side of things, having marketing meetings and looking at prospective book covers. And yeah, I mean, the most of being a writer is a joyous thing. It's just when you're waiting for news, that's the horrible part.
And you mentioned there that you when you were on your path in, you did the documentary, your agent couldn't sell stuff and moved on from you. And am I right in saying that you then kind of pressed pause for about 12 years and you said, you know what, I'm not going to write anything. I've tried my best, but I'm just going to stop it. I mean, is
Yeah,
that
it
right?
wasn't
And if
that
so,
long.
wasn't that? Oh, it was not that long. I mean, how
It
long did you
wasn't
pause
12.
for?
It wasn't 12 years. It was about 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
So what
And was that a
happened?
hard decision?
Well, it wasn't at the time, because I was just worn out. I was absolutely kind of exhausted by the whole process of years of trying to get something published. And I was going through a few life changes at the time. So I had just started like having children. But more importantly, I'd actually got a good job, a good day job. So I spent my 20s doing customer services, basically because I wanted to do a job that I didn't have to take home with me, so that I could spend all of my kind of my creative energies at home on writing. So I had a day job where I just down tools at 5 p.m. and go home, and I didn't even have to think about it. And I didn't have to work at weekends or anything.
Yeah.
And then I spent a year working in Japan as an English teacher, and I was still writing then with Louise because we were writing a novel together, kind of emailing it back and forth. And then when I came back to the UK, I was in my 30s by this point, and I thought, well, I better actually get a proper job and actually try and build a career if this writing thing isn't going to happen. So I started working in marketing in London, online marketing, and I got promoted quite quickly, and I kept getting promoted. And this was the kind of job basically where you get up in the morning and you start thinking about your job, and you go home and you're answering emails,
Mm-hmm.
and your boss is ringing you at 9 o'clock with questions and jobs that they want you to do. It was a kind of all-consuming
Yeah.
job. So that took up all my creative energy, and I also got um, fulfillment from doing it as well because it was fun. And actually, I was getting rewarded for doing it. I was getting praise, and I was getting promotions and pay rises, and and actually seeing the results of what I was doing like every day. So it kind of fulfilled that need in me that I suppose I'd wanted from the writing, but that I'd never got. And so yeah, I just kind of thought, well, I'm going to concentrate on this from now on, and build my career. Um, and then Amazon went and launched the Kindle and KDP, and suddenly I saw an opportunity, and that's what we did. So Louise and I had written two books together by this point, and we hadn't managed to get them published, even though one of them actually been optioned by BBC Drama.
Oh.
And it never so although we couldn't get a publisher for it, we got it optioned and got a little bit of money for that. And they've hired a script writer, and as most TV things do, it fell through and never got made. But we had these two books which we thought were really good, actually. We were really proud of them. And I said to Louise, well, why don't we put these up on this new fancy thing called Kindle Direct Publishing? And you never know, we might sell a few, and it might attract the attention of some publishers.
Mm-hmm. And this is like early days then. It's literally brand new in the scene type thing.
It was brand new in the UK, as far as I remember. It had been going in the US for a year or two, and I was reading some stories about authors who'd had success. Some of them, like there was a guy called John Locke, I think, who'd sold 1 million books. Well, he went on to sell 1 million books. And there was all these people writing kind of like vampire novels, and most of them have disappeared now. Joe Conrath was one of them. There's these people who are kind of like big names at the time, and some who are still around, like Blake Crouch has gone on to like big things.
Yeah.
But we were the first, and Stephen Leather was doing it as well. I know he's a very controversial figure in the publishing world, but he was traditionally published, but he was also doing self-publishing on the side, and having a lot of success with it. And I thought, well, why don't we give it a go? And to cut a very long story short, we did really well, and we sold like tens of thousands of our books and got to number one. And we were the first kind of fully indie authors in the UK to get to number one. And that then led to us getting an agent. And very quickly, I think within a week of him sending the books out, we had a publisher. We had a deal with HarperCollins.
Wow.
So it was a whirlwind summer, very, very exciting.
Yeah.
The summer of 2011, from having years and years and years of failure and rejection, suddenly we were number one on Amazon, and number two, because we basically took over the top two spots in the Kindle charts, stayed there for about a month. We were on all the, like, we were on the news, we're on BBC Breakfast, we're on Sky News, we're in all the newspapers wanting to interview us. We're getting all this attention. We had agents approaching us. It was just amazing. It was just
what
so
an absolute
exciting.
turnaround, from, as you say, from all that time of nothing to suddenly everything at once.
Yeah, and I mean, I will never ever forget that moment when, because Catch Your Death, which was the second book we'd released, was sitting at number 2 on Amazon. I mean, first of all, I'll never forget the day when it kind of shot up the charts from nowhere to the top 10. It happened really fast. Suddenly, the sales took off. And then it was number 2, and I was sitting there on Amazon hitting refresh, as you do. I mean, I still do that now. And the chart changed and it went up to number 1. And I was like, I was sitting at work, not doing my day job, hitting refresh, and I was so excited. And I rang Louise, and we were kind of weeping with joy that we were number 1. It's one of the greatest moments of my life. It's just so exciting.
And it was great, I
So
suppose, that you could share that with Louise as well, because often it is a
yeah, it was. It was
solitary thing.
lovely
But
Yeah.
yeah,
because yeah, I was saying this to somebody the other day when they were asking me about the pros and cons of co-writing. And apart from kind of having somebody to share the work with, it's the fact that you've got somebody who cares as much as you do.
mm,
Because no matter how much your partner or your spouse or your friends or whoever care, nobody will ever care as much as you do about how your books perform or what the reviews are like or whatever. So yeah, having somebody to share it with, and because we've been friends for so long and we've been writing together for so long, yeah, it was great. It was a really nice moment.
and did you do anything to cause it to have this, stratospheric rise in the charts? Did you market it or anything like that, or
Yeah, well, I mean,
was
I
it just
was,
the early
yeah.
days the sort of
Well, we
timing of
didn't,
it that
yeah,
was right?
we didn't just put it there and kind of and sit back. I was working like really hard to try and make these books sell. I mean, I would say on top of my day job, I was doing 2 or 3 hours a day, doing everything that I could in obsessively to try and let people know about the existence of these books. And that was everything from like doing blogs, doing guest posts on other people's blogs. There were lots of forums around at that time where you could go and promote self-published books, Facebook groups, just everything that I could think of. We did it. Constantly rewriting the description as well, like the product description, and trying to
Hmm.
tweak it. Um, Befriending other indie authors, like networking and trying to get reviews, and just doing everything that I could think of to try and reach readers. And it worked, because what happened was that slowly people bought the first book kind of slowly, and it
Hmm.
climbed the charts gradually. And then when the second book came out, like 3 months later, enough people had bought the first book by that point that when Amazon sent out an automatic email to say there's a new Voss and Edwards book out, enough of those people bought it in one go, in one day, to send that book flying up the charts. And then it stuck. That was the kind of miraculous thing, because usually when Amazon send out an email, the book kind of goes up and then it drops straight
Yeah.
back down again. But they stuck. And I think that the fact that they were, I mean, there was a lot of terrible self-published stuff being put out at the time, I have to say. And I think the fact that our books were really good and they were very professionally, they looked very professional, and we were very good at writing blurbs and things, and being innovative. Um, that yeah, they stuck around. So also, I mean, I'd been working in marketing, digital marketing for years by this point as well. So I kind of was able to use some of my skills that I'd learned from there,
And once you,
which
you
helped.
you signed the book deal with HarperCollins, they republished those two books and gave you two more
Yes.
books. And I wondered, how did you find the process working with a publisher compared to working with the Kindle store?
Well, I mean, to be honest, it was frustrating because the whole experience is purely colored by the commercial performance of those books. So if they'd gone on to sell huge numbers, then my story from now on would be very different.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
But what happened was that did they did manage to get Catch Your Death into WH Smith Travel, and I think it was in Asda quite briefly and in Tesco. But for some reason it just didn't take off, like it didn't sell. Um, and we had kind of taken our foot off the gas a little bit in terms of the marketing, because I think that we thought that the publisher's going to kind of take over and do all of that, and we can just get on with writing the next books. We didn't get the balance right. So with the self-published books, we were doing like all the marketing, but
Yeah.
not really doing any writing. And then we switched completely to doing lots of writing and no marketing, or very little. We were doing like some social media, and we would do like interviews and stuff, but yeah, it was just so disappointing. I mean, the experience of working with the editor and the designers and going in for meetings at HarperCollins and was great. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I've gotten really, really well with my editor, and I like being edited. That's one of the reasons why I don't really like being self-published, is that I I enjoy that process of writing a draft or a few drafts and then going through the whole structural
Yeah.
edit process, which I'm actually doing at the moment. Um, but yeah, it was just commercially disappointing, not just for us, but for everybody, because I think they did really try to sell them, but they just sometimes these things happen that they didn't take off.
Had you worked
Um,
with an editor when you self-published?
No, because we just used to edit them ourselves because
Hmm.
we were constantly like sending chapters backwards and forwards. We would edit each other's work. So I think they didn't need that much editing when they went through a little bit of a tweak, and the ones that had been previously self-published, and then the next books, the
Yeah.
brand new ones, went through through the whole process. But again, because Louise and I had done so much work on them together, they weren't like particularly heavy edits, unlike some of my solo books which have followed, where I've had like terrible months of pain editing books. But yeah, it's so it was only a kind of commercial reason that I then went back to self-publish the Magpies, which was the one that I had sitting in my in fact it was sitting in my wife, who was my then girlfriend's, Gmail inbox. I think that was the only copy of it in
Oh,
existence.
wow.
I'd emailed it to her at one point. She hadn't even read it. And and I was like, you know that novel that I wrote like years ago? Do you still have it? And she found it kind of thousands of emails deep in her inbox. I mean, I think I had it on paper somewhere in the loft, but it would have been a real pain
Yeah.
to transcribe it all. And so I then went, so Louise then helped me edit that book and update it, as did my wife. They both read it and made lots of notes, and I made some changes to it. And then I put it out using something called White Glove, which I don't even know if it exists anymore, but Amazon used to have this program where you could self-publish through, if you had an agent, it was like assisted self-publishing.
Right.
So um, you would, your agent would basically send it to them, and they would do all of the formatting and all of the kind of technical stuff. I still had to design the cover,
Mm-hmm.
or find somebody to design the cover and write the blurb and choose all the kind of meta tags and all of that stuff. But then they put it up there, and then they said we will send out an email to promote it, or one or two emails. So actually what happened was it took 2 or 3 weeks where I thought this isn't going to work, it's not selling. And then suddenly it shot up the charts. And I think it's because the email that they had promised went out.
Right.
And again, like Catch Your Death before it, the Magpies went up the charts and stuck and it kept climbing. It just kept climbing like 1 or 2 positions every day until it got to number 1. And that was another amazing moment of like having been through a year of thinking my career was over already after having all this kind of success, self-published, then having a really awful year in 2012, where it wasn't just career kind of went badly, but literally everything in my life went wrong in 2012. It was my annus horribilis, whatever it's called. It was all terrible. And I was so broke, so completely broke. And because I'd left my day job, I'd moved to Wolverhampton. I'm not saying that was one of the terrible things, but I'd moved here because my wife's from here, and I wanted to be able to give up my day job and give the writing like a real go as full time. And it was much cheaper to live here, and we'd have babysitters and so on as well. So yeah, I just had this awful year. I had loads of health issues and things as well. It was just, I think, probably caused by the stress. And yeah, just amazingly, the Magpies turned everything around for me. Like it was Easter 2013. And I mean, my aim was if I could sell 20,000 copies, I would basically kind of get out of debt and manage to keep my head above water for a little while. And it sold like 600,000 copies or something
Jeez,
now.
that's
Incredible.
I mean,
And basically saved my life, that book.
I mean, I have to ask, what is going on here? Because you've had this great success with Louise, with Catch Your Death. Then you go to the traditional publishers and it kind of goes haywire. And then you go back to doing it yourself and it goes skyrockets again. What is it that you're doing that HarperCollins aren't? I find that's fascinating.
I really don't know. I mean, I think possibly the fact they were trying to remarket books that had already sold, that were a little bit, look, people had seen them already.
Mm-hmm.
And so the kind of ebook sales, maybe it's much harder to relaunch something, I think, than to launch something new.
Yeah.
And we were the first of this wave of people who self-published and then went over to traditional publishing. So it was all a bit experimental. And I think also that, I mean, these days, the traditional publishers are so much better at digital publishing than they were 10 or 11 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all brand new. It was like the Wild West. And so I think having the kind of freedom to do everything yourself, and it was very competitively priced as well. I could put it out at 99p, and I was like able to kind of tweak the description and try everything that I could think of to try and get people to know that it was out there. That all helped a lot. And then when the Magpies was sort of flying high in the charts, pun intended, Thomas and Mercer came along. Thomas and Mercer is part of Amazon Publishing, as you know, and they made me an offer for a 2-book deal. They wanted to republish the Magpies and for me to then write another book. And this time, because I thought, well, Amazon Publishing know how to sell ebooks, and they've got these enormous email marketing lists, and they know pretty much the behavior of everybody who's ever bought an ebook on Amazon and what people do on their Kindles and so on, then it felt like a much safer place to be, as somebody who was mainly known for selling digitally.
Yeah.
And it worked out.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that.
I've now been with them for 10, 11 years, and have published 2 more with Louise with them, and then I think I've done 13 solo books with them as well, plus a couple of novellas. And they've sold 4 million copies, and most of them have got to #1 in the UK. A couple of them did really well in America as well. And yeah, so I've been doing it full time now for, yes, for 10 years. 10 years.
Amazing. And it's a great story in a way. I'm sure it didn't feel like that at points, but the showing the persistence of it, the ups and downs can be quite extreme.
Yeah, well, it's one of these stories where the kind of telling of it is very much dictated by the ending.
Yes,
I mean, when I say ending, I don't feel like I've reached the ending yet. I feel like I'm at the midpoint, perhaps.
Yes.
Exactly.
But from the position that I'm in now, and it's still, I mean, you still have ups and downs. Like some books do better than others, and it's not just I'm not sitting around on like some kind of mounting of cash, which means I can just keep going. I'm still having to work really hard and write a book every 9 months to kind of keep being able to make a living doing it. So but yeah, I mean, that's obviously I'm in a much better position than I was 10 or 11 years ago. But yeah, it's still hard work, and it's still having to keep those books coming and keeping people reminded that you exist.
Yeah.
And I think that's much harder in a way with ebooks than it is with kind of print books and authors who mainly sell through bookshops, because I think it's people who read on Kindle, I think, are much more fickle and often don't even remember the name of the book that they've read, let alone the name of the author. So trying to engage that audience and keep the audience engaged, I think, tough.
Do you get because obviously we've spoken with other guests about the sort of snobbery that there certainly was, and I think still is to an extent, between trad publishing and self-publishing. But is there even that sort of divide between what is trad publishing with Thomas and Mercer, but the fact that it's slightly different
Digital
because it's done by
first,
Amazon and stuff like that? Is there still that divide there that that affects how people view it in a way?
I think as far as the public are concerned, I don't think people really care. I don't think anybody has ever said to me, well, in the last 5 or 6 years has said to me, "Oh, you're not like a proper author." But what happened? But sometimes in the past, and it's much better now than it used to be, there would be things like I would do a festival or something, and the bookseller would be reluctant to stock the books because they were published by Amazon. Which you can understand, because Amazon are like their kind of big rival. Or it would be very unusual for an Amazon published author to get shortlisted for one of the big crime prizes, for example. I think it might have happened once or twice, but it's very rare. I'm not saying I deserve to be nominated for any of these prizes, but out of all of us, you would think that it would happen a bit more often than it does. And in America, it's completely different. So when I went to Thriller Fest last month, I was up for one of the ITW awards there, as were lots of other Amazon authors. Yeah. So I think that I don't know whether snobbery is the right word, but it's like a different ecosystem. It's a little bit like, like back in the day, you'd have AOL and then you'd have the rest of the internet. It's a little bit like that. So being an Amazon author is a little bit like being in the walled garden of AOL.
That was when you used to buy those little, you get like a disc that's full of magazines. It was like 60 minutes of AOL, and I was always like, what is it? What 60 minutes of what?
You still occasionally find people who've got AOL.com email address.
Yeah. My wife has one still.
It's a little bit like like that, like being in a different system rather than a kind of lower system, or it's like a parallel universe in a way.
But is it the same as, I suppose you've sort of already covered this, but name recognition, is that more difficult because people aren't going into a bookshop and seeing your name everywhere in the same way that they would with, I don't know, Big
I
Five
don't.
publisher or something like that.
I think it might be. I feel like I've been around now for so long, and I kind of have been to so many festivals and have done so many events, and my books. I mean, the first 5 or 6 years, I never had a magazine review or anything. Would never
Yeah.
have a review in any kind of media. But I've got all of that now. It's just been a slow process, kind of
Mhm.
chipping away at it, and having publicists do that. Personally, I feel like I am now a name author that people recognize. But I think that it's maybe for a new author, and it might take longer to kind of get that recognition and to get that kind of brand name outside of the kind of ecoverse, the Amazon
Yeah.
ecoverse. Um, but then you also see lots of brand authors being published by Thomas and Mercer now. So Dean Koontz, for example, is
Mhm.
is a Thomas and Mercer author. Um, and I know lots of people who've signed with them, like Claire McGowan, for example, who's doing incredibly well. Susie Holiday. There are lots of us now who've kind of been around on the scene for a long time who've gone over to Amazon. And so yeah, I feel like the barriers have come down a lot. And I know that I'm not going to walk into Sainsbury's and see my books on the shelf. And most Waterstones don't have them, but my local Waterstones has them. And whenever I do an event, so like I did an event with Mark Billingham last week in Birmingham, and it was an indie bookshop, and they got the books in, and they sold really well, and it was great, and I mean it's lovely to kind of work with indie bookshops
Yeah.
and to see my books on the shelves in those places.
And you said that you're pretty much putting out a book every 9 months at the moment, which is an
Yeah.
incredible rate. And I have to ask, what's your process? Do you plan stuff in advance? Do you pants it? How often do you sit down and write every day? What's your routine?
So I write Monday to Friday, generally during the school hours.
Hmm.
Although now my kids are a bit older, I also work when they're at home. It used to be that they would get home at 3:30, and it would just be such chaos that I
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to do any work. But it's much easier now than it was. They'll just go to their rooms and get their iPads out,
Yeah.
Especially
and
on the Xbox and nice and quiet, is it? Yeah.
I should say, oh, they'll go into the garden and do lots of healthy activities. Um, and yeah, and I aim for 2,000 words a day. That's my. I feel satisfied if I manage to hit that word count every day. And I generally am a pantser, but I have tried recently to become more of a plotter. Um, but I always veer wildly away from the outline. But my editor almost fell over when I sent them an outline recently of a book that hadn't started yet. I think that's the first time that ever happened. I'd actually plotted out a book before I'd started it. But this is the book that I'm doing the structural edits on now. The end result is vastly different to that nicely plotted out. I mean, even the motivation of the killer and who done it and all that kind of stuff has changed.
Do you find that your first drafts are often very different than your final drafts? Like, is this
Yeah.
planning you've done? Is this almost like a first draft in kind of truncated form, maybe?
Yeah, I am a very inefficient writer. I will write hundreds and hundreds of thousands of words to get a final 90,000 word book. Probably for every word that ends up in the book, I throw two away. So I will write lots of drafts of my books often right up until the last second. I'll be changing the ending, rewriting the last chapter, coming up with a new twist, which entails having to rewrite the whole book.
So it's incredibly stressful.
It's fun. This is the bit that I really enjoy. I find the first draft enjoyable in a way, kind of the kind of finding the story and coming up with the characters and kind of writing those scenes for the first time. But the bit where you have got to the point where you're ready to send it to your editor, and then they come back with all the notes, and then you've got to solve all those problems. That the challenge of doing that and having the words on the page already, so having something to work with, even if I'm deleting lots and rewriting, I find that really, really satisfying. And it possibly in a slightly masochistic way. I really enjoy it. I mean, I kind of sometimes the bits that are harder when you get stuck and you can't solve a problem and you've got all these different plot threads that aren't coming together, and you need to make something happen and you just can't think of how to get there. And there have been one or two books, maybe more than that, definitely more than that, where I've been almost kind of banging my head on the floor, like rolling around in a kind of like an injured footballer, clutching myself in agony.
But do you in a situation like that, would you get in touch with someone like Louise and try and talk it through and try and work your way through the plot?
I do have a few friends, other writer friends who will help me. It's generally my poor wife though. Because she works from home as well, so she's always around. So I will go and find her. She'll be hiding.
She hears you. Hears the rolling around.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh,
yeah,
God.
yeah. And then I'll go and say, can I just talk through this problem with you? Often what will happen is that I just need to talk. I just need to hear myself speaking. And by the time I've kind of got to the end of my monologue, I've worked out the solution to the problem. Other times she does actually help me come up with the solution. And she's really good. And then I'll be taking credit for something like 2 years later. She'll be like, hang on, that was my idea. Are you sure? And the other thing that I find really helps is just going for a walk with a dog. Just don't listen to podcasts, because listening to somebody else speaking or telling a story in your ears is just distracting. Just going for a walk with some music on, or just silence. Usually by the time I get home, I've figured out the solution to the problem. So yeah, my wife and my dog are my most kind of trusted, useful allies in this whole process. The cat's no help at all.
So your latest book is Keep Her Secret. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yes. So this one is after I wrote 3 books set in America, and now I've come back to setting them in the UK. And it's a domestic suspense novel, which is the kind of subgenre that I started out with. And it's about this couple who have got back together after a 20-year trial separation. They were like college sweethearts, and they broke up. They haven't seen each other for 20 years, and then they meet up at a reunion. And they kind of very quickly kind of fall back in love. And just a week or two into their new relationship, they go on a trip to Iceland and go up this mountain. They hike up this mountain, and she's trying to get the perfect photograph. And she basically steps too close to the edge of the cliff and falls over the edge. So chapter 1 ends with a literal cliffhanger. And what happens next is that her backpack hooks on a rock and she's saved by this rock. This actually really happened to somebody that I know.
Oh, really?
Cool.
Bloody hell.
That's what influenced the story or inspired the story. Um, and while she's hanging there, thinking she's going to die, she blurts out that she deserves it. She deserves to die because of something that she did. And when she's rescued, I mean, this all happens right at the start of the book, so it's not really spoilers. When she's rescued, she then tells her new partner, who's the main character, what she did, like what her secret is. But what they don't realize is that somebody is eavesdropping, and then that person turns up intending to blackmail them, and everything kind of gets very dark from that point on, and
Wow.
they make mistake after mistake and dig themselves into a deeper and deeper hole as they're trying to as keep her secret, keep the secret of the title, and get to a point where they can kind of get on with their lives. So yeah, it was really good fun to write. It was one of the most entertaining for me because I love writing books about people who are in agony and going through terrible things and everything's going wrong, and the main character kind of spends most of the book in a state of panic trying to figure out how he's going to get out of this terrible situation.
So is the secret the same secret that your friend had that she blurted out? Or at what point
Yes.
does the
Oh
truth
no, well
come
that so
blazing
no,
into the-
she was actually on her own. She was
Oh
hiking in
God.
New Zealand and in the mountains of New Zealand, completely on her own, and she fell into I think she said it was a snow hole, and
what's a snow hole?
it's like I guess a hole that's covered with snow, so you
All
don't
right, you just can't
see,
see it's
and then you kind of just fall through like a trap,
jeez.
and she would have been trapped in this hole with nobody else around, and she might have died down there. She could have been there for days, but her backpack saved her and she managed to haul herself out. Came home quite shaken and told this story. And as soon as I heard this story, I thought, well, that's got to be a great opening to a book. But then I wanted it to be somewhere nearer the UK. So I moved it. I went to Iceland Noir a few years ago and I thought, oh, this is the perfect setting for this book, for the
Nice.
opening chapters of this book anyway. I didn't actually tell her that I was writing this book based on her story until I finished it. And then I was like, is it okay if I use this story
You can't
that
say
you
no.
told us? Luckily, she was fine about it. I mean, there wouldn't have been anything she could do about it because I think that people's stories are fair game.
Yeah.
And is
And
it?
legally, I don't know how true that is, but I feel like it's
I think it's fine.
Yeah,
I don't
I
see
think that's
any
true.
problems.
But I mean, is that how you get your ideas for stories? Other, news stories or stories you hear from people, or is it a mix of different things?
it's a mix. I mean, the one that always comes to mind was one of my books called The Lucky Ones, which is about a serial killer who tries to make people's lives good before he kills them, tries to make people happy before he kills them.
It's quite nice.
That, yeah, it's a pleasant little book. It's actually one of my favorites. Um, that came from overhearing a conversation in a cafe between these two women who were basically laying into this other woman that he wasn't there. They were gossiping about her and saying how horrible she was and how they kind of wish that she didn't work with them. And I thought, well, what if a kind of benevolent serial killer was listening in thinking, oh, I'm going to do them a favor and do away with this person that they don't like. So I came up, yeah, that kind of turned into the idea of a psychopath who thinks he's kind of helping people. So he does all this. So all this stuff that seems to be going right in your life is actually the kind of it's the maneuvers of this sort of twisted guardian angel. So yeah, that came from an overheard conversation. And I remember tweeting about it, and Steve Kavanagh replied saying, "Oh, that's a great idea for a book." And then we had a little conversation about it, and then I stored it in my brain for a couple of years before thinking, "Oh yeah, I can do something with that." So so yeah, but otherwise they could just come for out of nowhere, or it could be a news story, like you said, or it could be something that actually happened to me. So like the Magpies was based on the fact that I actually had neighbors from hell, and Follow You Home, which is the one about a couple who get kicked off a train in the middle of Romania, was based on the fact that I got robbed, gassed, and robbed on a train in France.
You got gassed.
Well, that's what we think happened, was that these bandits, I love the word bandits, it makes me think of Mexican bandits on horseback.
They had their
But
scarf over
yeah,
their noses. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, they were pumping sleeping gas into trains in France. This was in the 90s, the early 90s, knocking people out and then going through the trains and stealing all their possessions. Now, this might be one of those apocryphal urban legends, but when I did a talk in a prison a few years ago and I told this story, these guys go, "No, yeah, yeah, we used to do things like that."
Guys,
So,
it's must
so
bring your
yeah,
watch.
it was it was one of those experiences that happened to me when I was like 19 or 20, and then years later when my editor said to me, "Has any other terrible things have happened to you that you can turn into a book?"
Therapy
Actually,
session started.
A talk in a prison probably is a good place to get some inspiration if you chat with your audience.
Yeah.
I would have thought.
yeah, it was actually one of the best author events I've ever done in this prison. They were such great readers, and so they just came up with such brilliant comments and questions, and yeah, it's fantastic.
Brilliant.
So I recommend that if you ever get the opportunity to go into a prison and do a talk to a group, then yeah, seize it, because it's really, really interesting.
Yeah. Oh, that's very cool.
Mm.
So what's next then? You've got Keep a Secret, which is it just out? It's out.
Yeah, that
was in-
came out
yeah.
in at the end of May
That's right. Okay. So that's out.
2023.
What's your next? Have you? I think you've got your next one or two kind of locked in. Have you got more ideas after that?
So the next one is I'm editing at the moment. We don't have a confirmed title for that yet. I think we have a title, but it's not 100% confirmed, so I won't say what it is in case it changes.
Okay.
That's a crime novel set in the Lake District. It starts with somebody being left buried on a beach,
Good.
and left to drown as the tide comes in, and they find the
Good.
body on the beach. So a nice, cheery little
Nice
opening
comedy,
to
yeah.
that one. Um, and then I've got to write another book by January, and I haven't even started making notes for it yet. So we're now at the end of June.
Okay.
I've got 6 months to write it.
Is that like a night? Is that a normal time for you? Is that quite normal, or is it going to be a bit tight?
It's doable. Usually it takes me between 6 to 9 months plus edits. So, but I usually take off the school holidays, so the summer holidays. So I'm actually going to have to work through the summer holidays this year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be the challenge, is that first kind of 6 or 7 weeks
Yeah.
of the kids coming and saying, "I've lost my Minecraft password," spending 3 hours trying to find that, or having to take them out on some kind of educational road trip and not just letting them sit around being looked after by Mr. Nintendo all day. Yeah,
would you
so
ever?
that's going to be fun.
Would you ever want to go back to try and writing comics, or since that was your starting point?
God. I never really thought about that. I do still like graphic novels. I mean, I have to say I wasn't an artist by any stretch of the imagination. My illustrations were about as basic as, they were almost stick people. They were very basic. But yeah, I would definitely be interested in doing that. I'd love to see one of my novels kind of adapted into
Yeah.
a graphic
That'd be
novel.
really
That'd be
cool.
really good fun. I know they did that with The Girl in the Dragon Tattoo, and I've seen it with a few others.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
very
would be
smart.
good. But yeah, I mean, really, my main ambition that hasn't been fulfilled is is a film or TV adaptation, and I've come close a couple of times, but it hasn't quite hasn't quite happened yet. So
Would you want to write the script, or would you be happy to let someone else handle that?
I'd be very happy to let someone else do it. It's one of these things that every few years I think, oh, maybe I should try my hand at screenwriting, but it's such a new skill I'd have to learn, and finding the time for it would be so difficult. And everything that I hear about screenwriting just sounds nightmarish. That you could make a living writing things that never get made.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's
So
true.
I'm a big Bret Easton Ellis fan. He's like one of my favorite writers, and I listened to his podcast, and he basically spent 13 years not writing novels, which is what he's best at, which is what I want him to be doing, writing scripts and getting paid, and nothing ever got made. And I just think, how could you spend all those years doing all of that work and have nothing to show for it at the end of
Yeah.
it, apart
Yeah.
from the scripts that you're constantly being asked to rewrite? It's yeah, so that completely puts me off ever wanting to do that.
What was the last book that you read?
Oh, it was a really, really good one actually. It was called The Guest by Emma Cline. She wrote The Girls, which was about the
Oh
Manson
yeah.
family a few years ago. And this is her new one. And it's about this young woman who, I mean, I guess you would call her a sex worker. It's kind of like a girlfriend experience type thing where she lives with this guy who basically supports her. And then on Long Island, in this big fancy house, like surrounded by rich people, and he kicks her out, and she's got nowhere to go. Like she owes her ex-boyfriend loads of money, and he's after her. And so she spent the whole book is her kind of wandering around Long Island, kind of meeting people and just causing havoc,
Mm.
with the intention that she's going to try and get back with this guy that she was with at the start of the book. She's addicted to painkillers, and it's really tense. Like there's no murders or anything. It's not like a thriller in a traditional sense, but it's so tense because you've got this kind of tension about what is she going to do? Is the ex-boyfriend going to find her? How's she going to survive? And oh my God, I absolutely loved it. Absolutely. I was so absorbed by it. It's
Oh,
fantastic.
brilliant.
Brilliant.
What about
Highly
the last-
recommended.
What was the name of it again?
The Guest.
The Guest. And what was the last film that you watched?
The last film I watched was a really horrific social horror film.
You're a big horror film fan, aren't you?
Yeah, I love horror. It was called Soft and Quiet. Um, and it's all filmed in one like 90-minute. I don't think it was done in one take, but it's done in real time. So it
Oh,
starts.
yeah, yeah,
You just get the whole 90 minutes.
yeah. A lot of
Right.
tension off that right there. I can see.
Yeah, and it's about a group of basically killer Karens, I would say. It's about these women, these white women who get together, and they're kind of having a meeting as they baked pies, and you think it's going to be like some kind of nice meeting that they're having, and they turn out to be neo-Nazis. And then they do something. I mean, I'm kind of laughing about it, but it is really horrible. Like two people I know who watched it were like either had to turn it off or almost threw up because they were so upset by it because it was so awful. I made it to the end. I mean, it's a very powerful film. But it's not the kind of film you'd want to watch with your gran. But yeah, it was. I mean, if you've got a strong stomach for horror and for violence and for people doing horrible things to each other, then you'd like it. I'd
Oh,
recommend.
okay, okay.
If
I
you're
do
if
like
you're
dark
sensitive.
horror films, yeah.
But I mean, it kind of tackles racism and kind of just like the rise of, I don't know, just a lot of the stuff that people have been talking about over the last few years in America in particular with like the Donald Trump and so on. It's very, very powerful because of the way it tackles these issues. So
I see.
yeah.
Cool. And what about the last TV show that you watched or are watching?
Well, I just finished watching the new series of Black Mirror.
Okay,
Oh,
cool.
is it good?
It's yeah, I mean he's gone horror in that as well. I mean, he seems to have when I say he, Charlie Brooker seems to have kind of gone away from the trying to predict the future and all the stories being about technology. At least three of them, I would say, are horror, like mini horror movies. Um, and there's kind of one that's about Netflix, really, which is quite strange. It's very kind of meta.
That's cool.
But yeah, they're good. They're good, especially the last one, which is called Demon 79,
Oh,
which
yeah, I've
is
heard about
filmed
that.
like a retro horror movie, which is right up my street.
That's cool. I'll have to give that a watch because I think I really got into them, and then when Netflix started doing them, I kind of started to binge them, and then I was like, actually, you watch two back to back, and you think, I just feel like I just hate myself, and it was just so depressing, and I was like, it kind of put me off a little bit, but I'm quite excited for it again after a few years away from it.
They are quite dark. But they've got that well, that dark humor in them
Yeah.
that makes them. I mean, I've been a big fan of Charlie Brooker for years. I loved that Big Brother zombie show that he did. Have you seen that? Dead
Yeah.
Set. Dead
Oh,
Set.
I've heard of it. I've never seen it though.
Oh, I think that's on Netflix. It's amazing. If you used to like Big Brother,
Yeah.
it's fantastic. Davina McCall's in it as a zombie.
Yeah.
Well, the very, very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or, and I always say there's no right answers here apart from one. But we'll start off. I know you're a fan of Donna Tartt and Bret Easton Ellis, so we'll start off with The Goldfinch or American Psycho.
American Psycho.
Okay.
The Little Friend or American Psycho?
Yeah, no. Okay, why? Okay, why?
Well, I mean, I love The Goldfinch as well, but American Psycho I probably read 5 or 6 times, and apart from the first time I read it, now skip the really violent scenes when I reread it. I just think it's so clever and so funny, and it's such a brilliant satire on the 80s and early 90s. I mean, I actually think it's a work of genius. I think it's one of the most clever books that I've ever read.
What about if it was The Secret History or American Psycho?
The Secret History would win.
Yeah.
The Secret History will always win every competition. If you put it up against my favorite film, my favorite album, my favorite everything, The Secret History would win. Because I just think that's the perfect novel.
Yeah.
But American Psycho is in my top 5 novels, definitely.
Nice.
TV or cinema?
Well, I mean, that's really hard because I love going to cinema. I've got a Cineworld pass and I go as often as I can, and I'll go to like matinees during the day. And often my reward for myself for finishing a draft or something will be to go to the cinema. But I spend a lot of time watching TV. I mean, if I had to choose, I would rather go to the cinema. So I'll go with cinema.
Night Owl or Early Bird?
Oh, Night Owl, definitely. Although having said that, as I get older, it's changing a little bit. I start to I used to just be able to stay up till 1 or 2 and not feel tired at all.
Yeah.
And actually feel my most awake at night. So it's shifting a little bit. But yeah, naturally I would say I'm a night owl.
And music or no music when you're writing?
Music. Yeah. I have a turntable here on my desk,
Oh, cool.
which you can't see. So I listen to vinyl a lot and I collect vinyl. And I'm one of those people who spends huge amounts of money on limited edition records and gets up at 3 a.m. to go to record store day and buy Taylor Swift albums. And I can listen to anything really apart from hip hop or rap when I'm writing, or spoken word I wouldn't be able to listen to. Anything Anything
Yeah.
where there's actual singing or vocals is fine.
And the last one here, the most important one for me, real book or ebook?
Oh, well, I'm going to give you two answers for that as well. So I actually prefer the experience of reading ebooks,
Okay.
but I like having real books for the shelves.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had to come down on the side of one,
If I could only read one again, I'd probably read for the actual reading experience.
oh
I would
no.
pick the ebooks.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because
Good.
I actually find reading on my Kindle, um, just and this is for a very sad reason, is that my eyesight is a bit crap. So that I find reading on the Kindle much easier and more pleasurable than kind of having to get good light and squint at a real book. And I think this is something publishers don't realize, is that so many readers are middle-aged with failing
It's true.
eyesight that and the print's too small in a lot of books. And that's why the big adopters of Kindles are middle-aged people.
Mhm.
That's a
Young
good point.
people read
That's a
print
good point.
books. Middle-aged people tend to read Kindles because they can make the font bigger.
Yeah.
And it's the Amazon figured that out. It's a practical reason for people to go over to ebooks.
Cool.
Good,
Yeah.
I like that. I've been trying to. We always ask that question, and very few people ever pick ebooks. So
Okay.
there's 5 of us now.
I know
so
I know a lot of people, a lot of writers who only read ebooks
Oh,
now.
that's good. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Do you read ebooks then? Are you an ebook?
Yeah, I'm a big. I mean, I do like both, and I've
Mm.
kind of adopted this persona of an ebook fan on the podcast. But so I it's the hill that I die on every episode, and I die pretty
normally
much by
die.
myself every
Yeah.
episode. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, what happens is that I will look at them, and it's like if it's £10.99 for a Kindle book,
Yeah.
or
it feels too
£12 for a
expensive,
hardback, you're like, oh, it feels like the
yeah. You
hardback
get more
feels
for your
so
money
much.
almost, aren't you? If you're spending
Yeah,
that kind of cash.
I know. And then I might buy the hardback, and the print will be so tiny that I'll end up buying the ebook as well. And they get the money off me twice.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why they do it.
It's actually a very clever scheme they've got.
Yeah,
Yeah.
clever marketing.
I think they should bundle them.
Yeah.
Oh,
Absolutely.
totally. We've had this conversation before. Yeah.
Digital
Buy the
downloads.
hardback, get the ebook for free. Yeah.
That would be like they do that with music. They do it with vinyl. Why can't they do it with books?
Yeah,
It'd be
I
perfect.
honestly think they're missing a trick not doing that. Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, that was a fantastic chat with Mark. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your very convoluted, twisty path to huge success. I mean, that
Yes,
is,
indeed. Yeah.
as you said at the start, it does show the value of persistence and just keeping going. And it was also interesting hearing how the way that people, and I suppose bookstores in particular, view Amazon authors in the UK compared to the US.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I suppose it's something you'll have had experience with as well with your own books. But obviously, it's much less common to see a sort of Thomas and Mercer book on the bookshelves in whether it's Waterstones or whether it's your local indie bookshop or whatever. And obviously, there are genuine issues that bookshops have with Amazon, and they're very good issues. But at the same time, as we've discussed before, Amazon also has opened out a lot of possibilities for people that want to write books as well. So
Yeah,
it's
a thorny issue with not a real clean answer, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But it is interesting, the difference in attitudes between the UK scene and the US scene, where
Yeah.
he is nominated for awards, he is treated amongst his peers, and I think obviously in the UK now as well, because he's so successful, that's starting to be the case here as well. But it is a strange one. But obviously, as he said, Keep Her Secret is out now, so you can pick that up. And obviously, his next 4 million bestseller will no doubt be out soon enough as well. But next week we have another great guest, and it's another person who has gone through that sort of self-publishing into trad publishing route.
That's right. Author of the wonderful Combat Codes, it's Mr. Alexander Darwin, who has written a really interesting book, which I love the concept of, which is he's infused kind of martial arts and kind of those kind of old school action movies, Hong Kong action flicks with JRPGs and a kind of immersive sci-fi
science fantasy, I think.
Science fantasy. That, I think that is
he defines it.
It's just really cool, and it's a concept of you have one
each
place
country
goes
has
to
a
war with
champion,
another. Yeah, they put a
Yeah.
champion out to fight in a one-on-one brawl. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really interesting chat because we again go through that sort of whole process of how self-publishing works and how he made a success of it and how that led to the trad deal. So please do tune in for that one. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please do take the time to rate and review us on your favourite podcast app, as that always helps us to continue to get great guests on the podcast.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always do so by dropping us an email, which is podcast@rightgear.co.uk, or you can find us on every social media network going. Just search for @UKPage1, unless you are on Mastodon, which is writing.exchange/@page1pod.
Indeed. And before we go, I should have said this at the start because no one will be listening now, but if you are in Scotland, Bloody Scotland, the Crime Writing Festival is on the weekend of the 15th of September, and Tariq and I are both separately sharing some talks there with some great guests. So if you want to check that out, I've got a panel with Gillian McNillan, Catherine Faulkner and Stig Abel, who has been a previous guest on this very podcast. So you can still get tickets for that. So please do come along if you want to.
Absolutely.
But otherwise, have a great week and we'll speak to you next episode.
See you later.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is @UKPage1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.